Welcome back. I'm going to show you a few of the changes that I've made here, and then we'll go into how those worked. Now, first thing that we'll concentrate on is getting the player to die. So, get shot, and you can see I've got that little animation going on there. And now I haven't got it reinstantiating yet, but that will just be the next step. The other thing that I did do was added a little explosion there, okay, so that when they do die, there's an explosion. So we'll see if we get both of these onto this one video. Now, in terms of the player die, you can see here that there was an animation there, and there was just the one animation on the sprite sheet. So if you go back and look at your sprite sheet here, I think it's in my materials, it's this, or sorry, this one here. And so what I did is I basically got that sprite to just alternate, so to flip on the x-axis, and that way it looked like it was burning. And that's a pretty good representation of what they did originally. So let me just show you what I did here. So first off, obviously you've got to have a hitbox on the so a 2D collider on the player, and I don't think we had one. So just make sure you do add that box collider. And then I just sort of put onto the player movement here. So we'll open up that script and we'll take a look at what's done there. So the player movement, and I could probably, have put it onto a separate script, but I just sort of built it onto here. So it's sort of going to involve two things. One is I'm going to basically destroy this object, but before I do, I need to instantiate. So if I just sort of zoom in a little bit on this guy, okay, what I did was obviously added a public game object, this die animation that I called it, and that's just going to instantiate that new look, or that new thing. And I die counter there, and I don't think I've used it here, so this is actually not necessary. So let me just get rid of that. So basically I just put the instantiated the die animation. So if I come down here, void on trigger entry 2D, collider 2D, we've seen this before. Now I'm looking to see if I've got the compare the tag to the enemy shot. And so I've just instantiated, and what have I instantiated? Well, I've instantiated the die animation. Where have I instantiated? Well, I've instantiated where it was, and then I, maintain the rotation, okay? And then I basically destroyed the game object. Now, it's important that the destroy comes after the instantiate, because you want that to appear, and then you want that one to disappear, okay? So basically, we've gotten rid of our player. Now, we'll have to reinstantiate that one later, but that's the big idea here. All right, so once we've instantiated the die animation, obviously we have to have that die animation. So I created that die animation, or that die one. So in my prefabs, right here it is, the player die. And so all I did was I dragged it in from the sprite sheet, okay, and just like we did before, brought it in, and then made sure, it was showed up as a sprite render, and that was basically it. And then I had to go and create the die animation script. So let's go take a look at that. And so on that die animation script, which isn't showing up there, just a second here, scripts, die animation. What I did was sort of co-opted the fire rate one. So actually I didn't change up the names here. So I do have the fire rate, and I've got the next fire, and I created a die counter. So what did I do here? Well, at the start, I had to have a link to the sprite render component, okay? So that's very typical. At the start, grab the component, the sprite render, because I'm going to be using that. Now, what I wanted to do here was flip it back and forth. And so what I did was, like I said, I sort of co-opted that next fire one. And so in the update one here, Basically, when it instantiates, I want these two things to run. And the key thing that's going on here is I'm taking the sprite renderer, and you can grab the flip X basically component. And so if I look at Unity here, click on, say, well, I guess I go to my prefab, my explosion, I can see actually there's a flip X or a flip Y box. And so what I'm going to be doing is turning this on and off. And so how did I do that? Well, what I basically did was created a few things going on. First, there's a die counter. So I'm going to get this to alternate back and forth basically 25 times. And you can change that up. And I want this to sort of happen. So sorry, the die counter has to be less than 25. And the next fire, which I'll explain about, is going to be our sort of our timing here. And basically the other one has to be, the flip X has to be false, because I'm going to set it to true here. So those three conditions have to be true. And then I'm going to flip it, and then I'm going to set my next fire. And so that's the fire rate that we talked about before with, preventing us from sort of spamming the keyboard. Okay, and then I increase the die counter here. And then so what happens next is this will actually happen, because now it's set to true. So then it will flip it again, and basically it's the same code over and over again there. Okay, so that the fire rate is going to be on, and then the die counter increases, and then these two ones will keep increasing here. Okay, or keep running. So basically we'll alternate between flipping the X and not flipping it. Okay, and then finally, once the die counter is greater than 25, it just destroys the game object. Now I could have probably done this as an animation, but I decided, well, it's pretty simple. It's just flipping between the two, so I'm going to do it this way. Like I said, it's always a choice here. And so if we just watch that again, now that I've explained it. So if we're just watching the to die here, so I get hit, and then it does that. Now that might be a little bit long, and if I want to change that, I would just change up this number. I could have made it a variable, so I could just change it quickly. I didn't, but you could if you want. Just change it to an integer, and then just have it, maybe called the die max or something like that. Okay, so you could do something, but that should get you to be able to run your die animation here. Now the other thing that I added, like I said, was just a very quick explosion instantiation. Whoops. So if I can actually shoot, so there you can just see it, and it just pops up, and then it disappears. Okay, and so there's my die animation. To do that, one thing I had to do is go in and modify the sprite sheet, because the sprite sheet, we set it to automatic, and it did a reasonable job. But one thing, let's see here, sprite editor. One thing, and it's very hard to see. One thing that I noticed was at the bottom, these were, this one here was all messed up. And so you can go into the slice, and so you can slice here. Just a second, that's the automatic. Oh, sorry, I think, 1 second. Oh yeah, you just click on it, and you can modify it. So, like for example, I just basically, if these were sort of unnecessary, and I didn't even know what these are here, you can just delete ones, okay? You can just delete the sprite, and then you can just make it bigger, okay? So if you need to combine one, so that's basically what I did here. These had the automatic slicing, had done each of these little squares as individuals, and then so all I did was delete all of them except for one, and then I just resized it, okay? Resized one of them, and then that made that new sprite. So then on my sprite sheet, I'm just going to revert, because I don't want to save that. Then on my sprite sheet, then I look through here, and I was able to find, there it is, the explosion one, okay? Like say for these guys here, like I'm not sure what these are. I think they're just additions to on top of here. So I could go back and fix that up if I needed to. Okay, so I just dragged that in. And so I made that an object as well. And so if I go and look at my enemy, basically, just for a second here, my prefab on this guy, the explosion. Now, I should actually throw that on there. This one too. You might remember, and I will fix these up, my rows, they weren't all prefabs there, so I had to go in and change them individually. But if they are prefabs, all I should have to do is change it on here. And so in terms of the scripting, I had to go into my enemy script. So I think I put it under enemy shot. All right, let me just double check here. Yeah, and so we already had the destroy game object. And so what I've just done here is instantiated the explosion. Okay, so in order to do that, make sure you do create a game object explosion so you could drag it in like I showed you there. And then we instantiate it and then destroy the game object. And I don't think I had that on there before, but make sure you destroy the collision one as well. Okay, and then on the explosion one, so let's just go double check. So my prefab of the explosion, I have a little counter as well and a rate. So I'll just show you what I did there. So I've got an explosion script. And basically it's the same format as before. So I've got a counter and a time rate. And so at the start, so when it's created, I have to set that timer counter. So I do the time.time, so whatever time it is in the game, plus the time rate. So I add that on. And then basically here, once time catches up to that time counter, and I just had a debug log on there, just trying to figure it out. And in fact, these guys I could disappear. Once those, or I could remove, once that time counter is over, all I do is destroy the game object. And we're not going to be reinstantiating it all, right? It's over until we get to the next wave and the next level, perhaps. And so that's what I've done here. Okay, so I think that covers those two things. So we've got our player dying, and with the explosion, do have to reinstantiate it. Another thing that we have to deal with, we'll do that in the next video, is that reinstantiation. The other issue too, I'm just going to get rid of these guys so it cleans up my game a little bit here. The other thing that I have to deal with is some garbage collection. So at the moment, we're shooting. Now if I do, my shot does hit, it's okay. But the issue is we're getting all these enemy shots and player shots as well. And so we just want to make sure that we clean these up, that we don't have them just existing. So we'll just put barriers at the top and bottom to collect those missed shots there. All right. That's it for this video. I think that sort of covers everything that I needed to cover, and we'll see you in the next video.